the next phase of our growth for Brew AI is very exciting, where we're applying private generative AI models to finance and accounting. And I think this is going to be the most exciting phase of how we could use generative AI as a virtual CFO to actually help businesses improve.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us back here for another special interview with Gavin White, the CEO and founder of Brew AI. Gavin, last we chatted, we kind of talked about your unique background and how the idea of Brew AI came about and why such a privacy-focused project is very important for enterprise and really overall for everyone involved in the process. But today we want to kind of cover more of the use cases of it because you have quite a few. And they touch from everything from the DoD to medical research, mining, legal research, banking. You kind of are all over the place and where this could be applied. So, Gavin, there's a lot of use cases here. Where should we start?
So Michael, with the application of Brew AI or generative AI is quite broad and can be applied in many verticals or use cases, as you pointed out earlier on. I think, as a startup, I always tell other founders, when you first start your business, you seem to cast the net wide
Mhm.
to understand where it can be applied. But given generative AI can be applied in so many different use cases, we having an R&D team decided that we'll take on these use cases and start to apply it in various industries to understand the effectiveness of Gen AI on these use cases. And I think that's really important to
Mhm.
actually understand how we could interact in these various spaces.
Wonderful. So let's kind of dive in first with what you guys were doing with the DoD, the smarter budgeting and like what you guys were able to get out of that.
Yeah, with the DoD, it is quite an interesting use case. We were at the Quantico Cyber Hub and we looked at projects and the expenditure in each of those projects for the DoD. And by going into those details or going into how the DoD is spending money on these projects, and remember, there's not one project in the DoD, there are many, many projects.
Mhm.
And given the size of the budget, this is quite a large undertaking for the DoD to allocate funds to projects. And our job was, without going into the details, was to analyze the expenditure on these projects and look for anomalies, meaning, projects that may be inactive, still getting funding, and what were the outcomes from these projects? And I think these aspects of analyzing at that scale were very, very important for the DoD. We managed to do that quite successfully and provide the necessary information for the DoD.
Wonderful. And speaking of privacy, this is one of those use cases that privacy would be absolutely paramount.
Absolutely, Michael. And we've treated this project with the utmost of security and privacy in order to analyze the data that the DoD provided us. And I think this is sort of testament to the team, the way they handle the entire handling of data from end to end in order to comply with the privacy policies.
Perfect. And another one that obviously privacy would be huge on is the medical research side. So kind of moving into that second use case. This is one that I find very promising. I feel like AI applied to medical research could be very beneficial. Walk us through this one a little bit.
So it was an interesting use case for the medical research, and this specific institution cures, around 32% or 31% of terminally ill cancer patients. So in this research, we looked at DNA sequencing. Usually a patient only has around, 6 weeks, 8 weeks to live when they do approach these institutions, given the volume of data. We were utilizing the AI to sequence DNA in a specific manner in order to speed up the research to find those experimental drugs that could cure these terminally ill cancer patients. And it was a very interesting project.
Yeah, and again, privacy on this would be very important. But overall, people should be able to see how AI can apply to the medical field a lot of ways. And I'm excited to see what more can come of that. And moving to the third use case, mining, which I thought was interesting, and not just mining, but specific, a very, very specific thing. Walk us through this one, because this one I think is the most unique one I've heard of AI being applied
Yeah.
to so far.
So This was very unique. So just as context, when you look at the way trucks move in a mining exposure, if there's a holdup with trucks moving in and out of mines to offload the goods on the truck over to the boat or to another area, any delay in the movement of these trucks can cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mhm.
Okay, so any delay, you could hold up the entire load, but just one truck in that entire process. So that stalls. And these trucks stall because of the tires. So this specific use case went into predicting when will the tires go flat and when can these trucks replace these tires in order to keep the loads running smoothly across that entire process. Now, we were predicting when a tire gets deflated based on number of factors, the terrain, the wear and tear of the tire, whether the drivers are turning right and left too quick, and a whole other lot of factors using sensors on the truck, the weight, the load, pretty much all of these sensors the information was collected, and we're able to predict when the tires will go flat. And before it happens, is to alert the maintenance team in order to replace these tires or rotate the tires around in order to avoid these issues and keep the loads running smoothly. So it was a very interesting use case, and the team has done a really good job to articulate the outcomes.
Yeah, and it does go to show the wide breadth of applications AI could be used for across multiple different industries, in terms of solving bottlenecks, helping with
Absolutely.
logistic and operational problems. And still so, while it may seem you need less privacy than, say, the DoD or medical research, at the same time, companies' IP is incredibly valuable, and they want to protect that as well, and want to be plugging that into something that would use it against them in any way.
Absolutely. And, we built private, secure, predictive analytic tools in their environment on their GPUs to ensure that the data is kept absolutely private and encrypted, and ensuring that the outcomes from processing goes directly to the operations team, which is then utilized on the field.
And the next one up is one we had actually touched on a little bit in our previous video where we touched on the legal research side of things. And this is another one where people had used some open models and ran into some hot water, so to speak.
Yeah.
Walk us through how Brew is applied to legal research.
Yeah, so this is probably one of my favorites. And this became quite a huge success because one of the largest law firms in Australia today, who is also a vendor to the government, utilizes this quite extensively today.
Mhm.
You may have heard of Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, that went to ChatGPT and asked it to generate a case which he submitted to a judge, and it was the perfectly formed case that he utilized it, and he had to retract it because it wasn't real, so it was made up. And hallucinations played a really important part in this. So at Brew AI, we work really hard to solve this problem and reduce the hallucinations quite significantly, and then to craft material in order to summarize the cases or look into the details of the cases and provide the legal team the necessary constructs to actually then tackle those problems that have appeared on those documents. One of them is case law summarization. We do that very effectively, and also interrogating the case law itself on the document. Again, we do that very, very effectively in order to produce the right results.
Mhm.
Now, there's several factors the lawyers needed for this. Number one, obviously, when you're doing case law summarization, it cannot hallucinate because you can't submit to a judge made up information. That would just be a bad idea in so many ways. Number two, when the AI did summarize the case, they needed references in the document on how it did it. So it needed an audit trail. So we highlighted the paragraphs and the information it used to actually show you how it summarized the case. So lawyers can go and validate the summarization, or even the judge can. So
Mhm.
that was a big win where we can actually point out the content it used to actually summarize the case. And lastly, just didn't upload one case. It needed to upload hundreds of cases and do it instantly. So we created a tool to do it in parallel where you can upload many, many cases or many legal documents to have it summarized and questions asked on all the documents. For example, the questions were fairly standard across all of them, especially in accident compensation law. We were able to upload many use cases where you could ask all the questions at the same time, and Brew AI produced a report. It sped up that entire process quite significantly, to allow the legal team to then evaluate and produce the right outcomes.
Yeah, it is readily apparent at this point that AI is a tool that will help out a lot in the legal world. But it
Yeah.
is also clear that you guys have now seen the case studies of how things can go wrong and applied those solutions to help people out. And this could be the gold standard for how, people use AI for legal.
Absolutely. And I think the key to all of this is not only do we solve the problem, is to keep the data secure, encrypted, and safe that is only available for the legal teams. Not only that, it wasn't available for the entire legal firm. It was only available to groups of individuals that were privy to the cases, to those law cases that goes in front of the judge or in court. So we built in a lot of security, apart from the privacy and the security and the encryption, also the access as well. So all of that played a really important part. And lastly, a lot of the hardware that we've built needed to be housed in the lawyer's data center. And we were able to do that as well. I think that was very much testament to what the levels we went to in order to keep the data safe.
All right, Gavin, I kind of want to swap gears now to the use case number five. How you guys applied this to modern merchant banking.
So this is a really interesting use case. And again, I thought law is my favorite. I think all of them are my favorites, but every time I get to do a new use case, it becomes my new favorite. In this use case, we looked at analyzing financial reports of corporations. Looking at the income, the expenses, the expenditure pattern, where are they getting the best returns, how it's impacting individuals. And on this specific report, it was around property, the areas, the growth. And based on these decisions, we were able to look at how we can then analyze the data so that the merchant bankers can then apply that information in a very successful manner. And we can do this at scale as well to many companies. So it avoids all those horrendous hours you spent analyzing financial reports and trying to come up with the key nuggets that you could utilize in investment scenarios. So utilizing Brew AI, you can upload a financial report and extract the necessary information to provide the right investment advice. I think this is quite testament, given all the industries we've been to how AI works, generative AI. But more importantly, in this entire scenario, it's private generative AI, keeping the IP safe so that this company can have advantage, movers advantage over the other companies that are out there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Banking is one of the ones where IP is incredibly important to keep in-house. And kind of swapping to the very last use case I want to talk about here is the environmental social governance complexity. And how does AI apply to this? Now, this is one of those where a lot of companies have gotten in hot water because they would claim ESG and it would just terms like greenwashing would come out. And a lot of times it was just because they themselves had, inconsistent criteria and everything. So walk us through how you guys help in this case.
So this was an interesting use case. This was a research we have done with the University of New South Wales to formulate a plan on how we can measure the ESG, uh, or how do we put a measurement towards it to ensure that companies do comply. So we built an entire ESG framework out. We utilized AI in terms of the data gathering and the data analysis. We've utilized predictive analytics in order to predict in terms of the scale where you are currently and provide a good report on how a company is performing in terms of the ESG compliance requirements. And it was a very interesting exercise because we used a number of metrics in order to come out with the compliance documentation or framework in order to measure companies. Very exciting project, but
Mhm.
again, yet another use case on how AI can actually be utilized quite effectively.
Yeah, one of many. Thank you so much for coming on and like walking us through these different use cases. And as you said, they're kind of all your favorite as you apply this to more and more industries. You seem to find more and more interesting things that it can help with, and all while keeping everything safe and secure and private for the companies that you do work with and the institutions. So, Gavin, thank you again for coming on. Any last words before we go?
Yeah, so Michael, thank you for having me. And just his last words, I think, the next phase of our growth for Brew AI is very exciting, where we're applying private generative AI models to finance and accounting. And I think this is going to be the most exciting phase of how we could use generative AI as a virtual CFO to actually help businesses improve their accounting, their governance, their reporting, the cash flow analysis and understand how the business is operating at scale. And that's what I'm really excited about as our next phase of work.
Interesting. This kind of goes to the someone had said that they believe the first billion-dollar company will come into existence where it's just one person at the head and they'll have things like AI being their CFO and everything controlling a lot of these. So really interesting, and I'd love to hear more about that soon, Gavin. Thank you so much for coming on. Everyone from KCC Capital Partners is very glad to have you. And if anyone has any questions, don't be afraid to send them over, and please have a wonderful day.